Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Podcast, the #1 podcast for educating and inspiring entrepreneurs to turn their dreams into reality. Now, today, we have an extra special guest. I want you to welcome Derek Distenfield from Florida. How you doing today, Derek?
I'm awesome, Ben. I'm actually born in Florida, but out here in Silicon Valley, ready to rock this show. So let's get going.
Absolutely. So, Derek, I want to thank you for coming on the show. The first question that I have for you today is, what is your story?
Well, I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. My first startup was when I was 7 years old. I was selling baseball cards on the side of the road, and I graduated from there to selling Rice Krispie treats. My first and only corporate job was at McDonald's when I was 12. After high school, I didn't want to go to college because I didn't want to take my dad's money. And what he said, well, if you won't take my money, perhaps you'll take my advice. And he said, leave Santa Barbara, leave California, move to a big city and get some sales experience and start a company. So between the time I was 19 and 26 years old, I got some sales experience. I started a company that merged with Giuliani Partners, the former mayor of New York City, and it was sold to Dollar Financial Group. Had a couple other startups that were, we call learning experience today, but they were failures. And then at this time, I was 26 years old and thinking I was Mark Zuckerberg before I knew who Mark Zuckerberg was, and thought that I'd been there, done there with this startup thing. And I actually entered the Army. And so I walked into an Army recruiting station and told them I wanted to serve my country. And this was at the height of the anti kind of Bush kind of anger movement, especially in New York City. And the recruiters literally thought I was crazy, but I was genuine and said, no, I want to serve my country and I want to get a college degree. And I wound up doing both and served for 8 years in the Army and did the good, the bad, and the ugly. Really glad I did it, and also glad I don't do it anymore. And then while I was transitioning from the Army, I knew that I was going to start another company. And one of the problems that I encountered while I was an officer in the Army was I had lots of soldiers that were working for me run into simple legal dilemmas with nowhere to go. And so I started doing customer discovery and really learning about the legal industry and seeing what LegalZoom was doing and what lawyers were offering. And what I found was there was a giant gap in the middle. Is there was either national faceless websites like LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer, or high-priced lawyers. There wasn't anything in between. And so I started a company called Next Gen Justice that was legal solutions without lawyers, except we didn't have an e-commerce strategy like LegalZoom. We had retail brick and mortar stores. And so I ran that company for 18 months. We grew 50% month over month for about 18 straight months. Had a lot of customer tractions, developed a huge community of people that loved our low-cost legal services. And what ended up happening was lawyers hated us. And we ran into some legal dilemmas from lawyers. In fact, the very industry we were trying to reform ended up being our detriment. And so we ended up not being able to survive and combat the lawsuits from lawyers. And following that, I started working for a nonprofit called Bunker Labs, which helped military veterans with their startups. And then while I was doing that, I ran into 360 Payments. And here I am today, the chief operating officer of a large payment company. So it's a little bit of a long story and it's diverse, but I've done a lot of things that I'm proud of.
That's an incredible story. So you mentioned that you've been a lifelong entrepreneur. And I really want to dive back into those early days and really drill down into that and learn more about that. So you said you started off, I believe, selling baseball cards. Can you talk about how you got into that and why did you want to start selling in the first place?
I don't know. I'm 37. So to think back why at 7 I wanted to sell baseball cards, quite frankly, is that I saw that buying packs of baseball cards was not as good of a deal as going out and buying sets and then breaking those sets up and selling those sets into pieces. So I saw a financial opportunity, a way to arbitrage to be successful. But kind of really reflecting on it and what's more relevant for today is I think it was about that high or that satisfaction that you get from providing something to a consumer that they didn't already have. And that's really been my life mission, is to help people, whether it be with a product or a service, have access to something that they wouldn't already have access to. And I've done that in my entrepreneurial and charity pursuits. And I do that with my family, and I really incorporate that into my entrepreneur mantra.
So I think it's very interesting that you kind of have this purpose, this mission of helping people get access to things they otherwise wouldn't. How did that develop? In other words, how did you discover that was your specific purpose? Because I feel like a lot of people go about life and they're looking for this bigger purpose or looking for this thing that they're supposed to be doing. And it seems like you really found that at a younger age. So how did you actually go about doing that? And when was the time that you're like, that's what it is I'm supposed to be doing?
I don't know exactly when the aha moment was, but I've always been purpose driven. And I think making that a priority is vital. And I think that's how I've been able to stay purposeful, is just making it a priority. Fred Wilson, the famous venture capitalist, thinks it's in the top 3 things that a CEO should do is develop the vision for your company. And if you take that same perspective to your life, it's vital as the CEO of your life that you have that purpose for yourself, and then you incorporate your business around that. But it definitely starts with knowing who you are, taking priority of yourself, and then working on it. Believe me, I spend a lot of time on myself, probably as much time as I do on my businesses as I do on myself, and I think that's important.
I definitely agree. I mean, I'm sure you can see the writing behind me. Those are Ben Franklin's 13 maxims written out. And so I totally feel you. I'm obsessed with personal development and trying to become better. So, going back into your story and trying to understand more about it, you talked about how the only corporate job you ever had was working for McDonald's. Can you talk about when that happened in your chronology, and what was that like for you? What did you learn through that?
So I'm a big proponent of working and working at an early age. I mean, I was 12 years old and I walked into a McDonald's and asked for an application, and I filled it out, and they said you could come work here as long as you get a work permit. And I literally had to help my junior high school, I was in 7th grade at the time, fill it out. I mean, it was pretty basic, asking for your name and address and whatnot, but it was clearly not something that they did every day. And I just had always believed that work is a learning experience. And, there's a famous blog by, I think, Reed Hastings, where he talks about knowing when your earning years are and knowing when your learning years are. And clearly, when I was in 7th grade, those are learning years. And I would still advocate that in your 20s and 30s, those are learning, not earning years, meaning that you should be much more focused on what you're going to learn and develop in your either entrepreneurial or corporate pursuits than how much money you're going to make. And that is absolutely something that I focused on at a young age. And it just took Reed Hastings to kind of coin it and make it a little bit more articulate than I am. But it's something that I take very seriously.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you didn't go to college. And I believe you said you didn't want to go to college because you didn't want your dad to have to pay for it. At that point in your life, having gone through high school, what sort of person were you? I mean, what were your values like at that time? And what really drove you to make that decision?
Well, I don't know where I kind of discovered this mentality that the easy way in life isn't always the best way. But I had a very blessed life. I had a lot of great things growing up. I lived first in Los Angeles, in Venice Beach, and then Santa Barbara. My dad was successful and did a very good job in raising me. But I wanted things to be a little bit harder. I felt like that's where the learning came. And I'm not quite sure how I realized that, but it was something that I felt deeply ingrained inside me. So I didn't want to just go to college and, take classes I didn't really want to learn from or do something. So I wanted to do it on my own. And I wound up actually getting my college degree. I got it while I was in the Army. And, believe me, when you're a soldier in the Army, they make you pay for that college degree. And so I paid for that with my own money and my blood, sweat, and tears by serving my country. And that was the route I wanted to go to get my education.
That's incredible. So I believe you also said that at about 19, instead of going to college, before you went into the Army, you went and got some sales experience, and you started a few companies and had some acquisitions and mergers, and then had a few failures, a few learning opportunities as well. Can you take us through the chronology of how did you do it, right? How did you go from this high schooler to this professional salesman, this entrepreneur, starting businesses and making these things happen?
Yeah. So the first thing is that there's a famous admiral, ex-admiral in the Navy, Admiral Stockdale. And Admiral Stockdale was in the same prison as John McCain in Vietnam. And when he was asked, how did you survive? How did you make it year after year when you're being tortured, missing Christmas, missing family? How did you do it? And he said, there's two things that I did to survive, and really everybody did that survived. Is the first thing is that they had the unbelievable confidence that they will succeed at all cost. But the second thing that Admiral Stockdale said that he had, and many others, is that they understood the realistic situation on the ground. And you have to have those two things coupled together to succeed. And believe me, I know that entrepreneurialism or being an entrepreneur is not as hard as being tortured in Vietnam, but I've really always felt that those two traits are paramount to being successful. So, I'm 19 years old and I start off selling framed artwork door to door, and I learned to sell artwork in office buildings, and I carried it up every floor and, sold pictures of golf courses and dollies. And I just kind of learned from every single experience I could. And when I took the leap to starting my own companies, I knew that I didn't have all the answers, but I also knew that I was going to work as hard as I possibly could to get them. And, we didn't have things like the build, measure, learn framework and customer discovery and fancy words back then. But what I did know is that customers pay your bills. And if you listen to them and you solve a real problem, you will be successful. And so those are just some of the things that come to mind about how I started. It's being confident yet realistic and being customer focused.
Absolutely. So you mentioned how there were some, acquisitions and there were also some failures. Can you talk about specifically what exactly that process was like? Like, what company did you develop that got acquired, and how did that actually go down? And then what did you do after that?
Sure. So so first of all, the companies that failed are much faster stories. So I had a company called Travel Schmavel. It was a travel website where we aimed to develop brand loyalty on a travel website. I mean, pretty much everyone still just kind of Googles, and whatever cheap fare they find, they buy it. We felt that we were going to be able to develop brand loyalty on our travel site by delivering people's luggage. So this was in the mid 2000s when everyone could check 2 bags. So it was a really poorly timed idea. The second thing we had was an Internet of Things wearable that was a GPS tracker inside of children's shoes to see where they were located. Again, a good idea, that this was in the early 2000s, where third-party applications on cell phones was still a future event. It was almost like the Matrix back then. Getting a third-party app on a BlackBerry was not going to happen. So we raised some money, developed a good prototype, got it to be fit a wearable on the shoe, but we struggled with the user interface in that experience that perhaps someone today might not have. So definitely learn the importance of timing and understanding that you shouldn't always build what you can. You should look at what you should build, and that doesn't always come from the skill set or the idea that you have at that point in time. When I was in my early 20s, I developed a software with another guy that helped payday loan outfits. And the way it did that is it told consumers based on their location where they could get a loan. And so it was a good alternative. So yes, you could get a payday loan from us, or you could walk to this bank and apply here. So it was giving consumers that other option and that other idea. It wasn't originally developed for a payday loan company, but they saw it and thought it would be a good thing for their customers. And so we developed it, we rolled it out. It was a pretty tedious process because we essentially developed it as a database, not like it would necessarily be done today, where you would just Google it. And we merged with Giuliani Partners, and they helped us connect with the payday loan people. And I'm sure there's a lot of gaps in between that I'm skipping over, but that's essentially what happened.
So at what point did you, and maybe it hadn't happened yet, maybe it did, but I'm interested in hearing from you about it. But at what point did you know that, all right, I'm an entrepreneur for sure. This is my life's calling. I love building companies and doing all these things. At what point did it really click and you're like, all right, this is my life. This is what I'm doing?
I don't know if I ever had that click of a moment. And sometimes I think about, becoming a teacher would be cool. And so I don't necessarily know if you have to go all in mentally, like this is my life's calling. I do think that, kind of going back to what I said before, you can be realistic and have that confidence that you're going to succeed. And it's also, if you think about life as, it doesn't have to be about necessarily earning and being Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, but learning. So I think of that as a success. So even though that travel company or the legal company I mentioned a little bit about weren't raging successes, they were still tremendous learning experiences. And there's still something that I'm proud of. So I look at any endeavor. Is this something that I can A, learn from, and B, be proud of every single day that I'm doing it? And that's how I look at it. I don't believe that, if you start a company and it fails, you're going to wind up homeless and drinking from a drinking fountain. The world doesn't always work that way. I'm sure it may for some, but I just have said, hey, if I learn and I can make people's lives better and get better myself, that's what's foremost in my mind.
Absolutely. And I think to what you said, I think it's very important for the individual to understand what it is they're trying to get out of it. Because some people might, the metrics that are super important could be, hey, how much money am I making? Can I go to that top level? Can I be that Bill Gates individual? And I think it's really important to really understand what we're going for, what we're out for, and why we're doing what we're doing.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head right there. And I think that politicians and educators, they try to lump entrepreneurs all into one group. And there's vastly different kinds of businesses, and you could be successful in all those kinds of businesses, whether it be a small business, a family business, a lifestyle business, or a tech company. But those are all different businesses that require different kinds of capital, different kinds of risk, and different efforts altogether. But all of them can be successful, and all of them can ultimately make your life happy and fulfilling. And I think it's important to know which one of those you want to be. I think it's one of the first questions that you should ask yourself before you start your business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your time in the Army, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So how did you develop as a person during that time? Did you see a shift in your core values? And if you did, what were they? And who did you really become through that process?
So I don't know if I shifted my core values. One of the biggest skills that the Army gave me that I didn't have before I entered was the ability to plan and execute missions. And today it would be plan and execute processes and develop those, at scale. And that's one thing the military does really well, is developing processes and procedures at scale that are really simple, that could be understood down to the lowest level. And, that was something that I picked up. I also learned how to handle stress and multitask and accomplish things with very little resources. And I probably had that last part already, but I think the Army really kind of puts you out there and expects you to accomplish great things and don't always give you the tools you need to do it.
Absolutely. So as you were coming out of the Army and you were moving into that next phase, what did you do? How did you go about kind of reevaluating what you wanted to be doing with your time?
I mean, for me, I was just looking for a problem that I wanted to solve. And as I mentioned, I had soldiers that were running into simple legal dilemmas, such as needing a divorce. And they didn't really have anywhere to go because lawyers are so expensive. JAG officers in the military have limitations because it requires you to be licensed in a particular state. And when you're always moving around like the military does, there's not a lot that they can typically do for a soldier that just needs a simple uncontested divorce. And so I just started doing research and seeing what else was out there, because I was floored that there wasn't more. And I just started putting myself into the shoes of someone that was going through the most stressful situation of their life, like a divorce. And I realized that you probably need a little bit more hand-holding than just a website. but you perhaps don't always want to pay the high prices that a lawyer has. And so I really just kind of started with that problem. And then I realized that it wasn't just in family law where there's simple issues that people have. It's, you know, forming corporations, forming LLCs, simple wills. And there was just this huge opportunity to fulfill my personal mission, which was provide people access to legal services that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. So once I found a problem that was in line with my personal mission, I knew that I was on to something, and I was like a dog with a tennis ball. I was going to go for it and just move forward.
That's great. So as you then encountered the legal troubles yourself and had to move on to the next venture, what made you want to jump into the nonprofit world, and how did that come about? How did that all develop?
So Bunker Labs is this national nonprofit that helps military veterans with their startups. And I met the founder, Todd Connor, at an event, and I was just floored by his vision. The idea that military veterans have the skills to be successful in startups, but they have one problem. They just don't know anybody. All their networks are with other people in the military. So this idea that if we could just provide military veterans a network and a little bit of help, they will succeed in business. And further, this is not just good for military veterans. This is good for the country. And I really felt like that was a tremendous opportunity to help veterans and help our country. And so I wound up helping Todd in various ways, helped open some chapters of Bunker Labs around the country, became the director of growth and engagement. And we helped a lot of veterans start businesses, and it was a great experience.
So after that experience, can you talk about how you really moved into 360, and what was the timeline there? Like, was it a couple days, a couple months, a couple weeks? What was really that whole timeline there?
So I stayed with Bunker Labs for about a year and a half. And during that time at Bunker Labs, one of the things, I loved what I was doing. I loved the mission. But one of the things that was kind of gnawing on me, to kind of use a sports analogy, I felt like a referee or an umpire, but not a player. I really wanted to get back into the game where I was working with a company and helping it grow. And so simultaneously, a friend of mine, Eric Mitchell, who runs LifeFlip Media, who I was doing a little bit of advising for, mentioned that one of his clients was looking for a chief operating officer. And did I know anyone interested? And I said to Eric, well, I think I'm interested. And so he connected me to the founders, Steve, Lisa, and Jesse. And I went in for an interview, and I said to them, hey, if you need a fourth member of the team that has typically been on the growth side, but is ready to sign on to hyper focus on your operations, your people, processes, technology, marketing, and finance, I'm your guy. And I'm going to fight tooth and nail to help you meet your objectives. And so there was a few interviews and a few phone calls, and we got to know each other. And thankfully, they accepted my proposal.
That's great. So now that you've been with 360, what exactly are you doing like on a day-to-day, and how is that again change your life, and what is your biggest focus now with that?
So a chief operating officer for those of us that have been in the military is much like an executive officer. You're you're not in command, but your job is to carry out the mission. It's my job to carry out my founders' missions and put together the people, the processes, the technology, and some marketing and finance to make it happen. So I wear a lot of different hats, but it's all around the premise that we want to make payments pain-free. And when Steve, Lisa, and Jesse started 360 Payments 7 years ago, they were a conventional kind of credit card processor. So going into small businesses and selling them credit card machines. And over the last 2 years or so, they've transformed the business into a technology company that has a piece of technology that now integrates credit card terminals into technology using any credit card processor or any gateway, which is super unique, and we're really excited about it. So it's definitely been about changing the fabric of the credit card industry. There's very few people that are doing it the way we are. So we're excited about it.
So when you talk about changing the fabric of the industry, I find that fascinating, of really going in and taking something that's old and just shaking it up and innovating and totally turning it on its head. So how do you do that? How do you at a granular level, how do you change the fabric of an entire industry?
I don't want to make it sound simple because it's not, but one of the things that you have to do, and I did this in the legal industry and I'm doing it here at 360, is ask the question why several times, and not just once, not just twice, but ask why, and then get the answer to that, and then ask why is that, and really kind of think about things in phases or evolutions and look at why this is happening and then why that's happening, and really whiteboard it out and understand, is some of it just historical bureaucracy, or some of it just, well, that's just the way it's always been? And how do you go through a design thinking exercise and really reimagine how this industry could be, and not just accept, well, that's the way it's always been, or that's the way our competitors do it, or and I think it takes a lot of work and takes a lot of effort, but it's definitely something that's worked for us both here and at Next Gen Justice as well.
So when you're asking these questions, you're asking why. How are you sifting through those answers and figuring out, okay, these were the questions, these were the answers, here's what I actually need to go implement. Here's kind of the next step. Like how do you figure out where that good data is that you should be moving forward with?
So one of the things that I do, and I know there's a famous story about how FedEx got started. And FedEx got started by using the hub and spoke model with their shipping, the same way that banks were sending money electronically. And they saw what banks were doing and said, well, why can't we create a hub and spoke model for our shipping and ship to, everyone in America in 2 or 3 days? And I think that's relevant because I really pay attention to what other industries, what other cultures, what other organizations are doing, not just study payment or not just study law, is how do you put a roof over LegalZoom in the legal industry, or how do you find a way in the payment space where you could be agnostic to credit card processor and machines and not force people, you have to use First Data or you have to use this credit card terminal the way everybody else in the industry does. And it's just, think about it from not just a customer's perspective, but other industries' perspective. And so to answer your question, I do a lot of research, industry specific, but also it's just a lot of understanding of how industries work and what is working well in one and not in the other.
So what it seems like is we need to be figuring out and asking ourselves really tough questions. So, why are things working the way they're working? Why are some things not working? How can we change it? How can we bring innovation to this space? How are other industries giving us clues as to what we can do and what we should be doing to really shake things up? Is that kind of an accurate summarization of kind of the process?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, my wife works in the medical device community, for example, and HIPAA is a huge topic of conversation. You have to be HIPAA compliant. And, there's a lot of time and energy spent on how we have to do things because of HIPAA. But what I would do if I was developing a piece of technology that had to be HIPAA compliant is I would find out how Coca-Cola keeps their recipe safe. No one knows the recipe of Coca-Cola. And so my point is that there's a lesson that could be learned in securing technology the way Coke does that could possibly be translated to the medical community. And we should all be open-minded and say, hey, how are they doing it? And can this work here? And there might be an opportunity to develop a way to make technology safe. And again, I just thought of that 30 seconds ago when you were speaking, but that's how I would go about thinking about it.
So we're gathering this data, we're implementing from other industries, and we're really analyzing this to figure out how best to move forward. Now, once we've decided, okay, this is how we want to do it, how do we, one, start to get traction, and two, how do we make sure that as we're trying to innovate and disrupt, we're not losing the core value of what we're actually trying to do?
So I actually have a little bit of a different view, especially based on a lot of my conversations out here in the Valley. I believe that the first step in any business is developing a community first. So I think of things in three phases. It's community, customers, then traction. And so if I was forming a business, the first thing I would do is develop a community around it. And a very good example is there's a Facebook group called Hire Club, and they have 25,000 people that get together in a Facebook group and they try to hire people, mostly in the Bay Area, but around the country. And the guys that started it just gave back and developed this community around a Facebook page and hiring. And they did that for, I don't know exactly how long, maybe a couple years. And then recently, 6 months ago, they launched a recruiting website and a recruiting service. And so I really think if someone came to me and said, I wanted to start X business, I think the first thing is develop either an online or an offline community. Start with that. Only give value. Don't go for those right hooks that Gary Vaynerchuk talks about. Provide that value, establish that credibility and that following. And then once you have it, try to test offerings. And if you continue to use that Hire Club example, what they did is they needed to raise a little bit of money. So they had this community of 25,000 people, and then they crowdsourced the fundraising. And so now you got this community of people that love you because you've done so much to you. Now they're invested in your company. And now you have someone that you could provide you feedback, test your ideas with, and ultimately grow that company as a starting point. And so that's how I would do it if someone was asking me what they should do. So
that's a very interesting perspective. And as you're saying all these things, and as you're giving so much value to us, me and the audience, I actually want to take a second to encourage those who are listening to go back and listen to what Derek has been talking about. Go back and listen to these things a couple times, because we're giving you a lot of, well, I say we, Derek is giving you a ton of great information. And if you go back and listen to it and really pick through it, there's a lot of hidden gems here that if you start to implement and use within your business can absolutely change your life and radically improve the things that you're doing. So go back and listen to it a couple times and really make sure that it's soaking in, that you're absorbing it. So that being said, Derek, how do we go about building this community? And I know I'm asking a lot of questions here, and I really appreciate you giving so much value. So I just want to say that. So thank you for doing all this.
Well, first of all, I will help any entrepreneur anytime. So I love being on the show and talking about what I'm doing, but I'll absolutely help any one of your listeners that wants to reach out to me. I think specifically the way you build a community is you find your skill set. The guy that does the Dilbert cartoons, I can't remember his first name, but one thing that he said is to be successful in life, you really need to be good at two things. You need to be good at your trade. And in his example, it's drawing. But the second one is you need to be good at communicating. And that communicating should be either speaking or writing. So get really passionate about one of those two in addition to your trade. And the reason why that's relevant is when you're developing your community, either do it by writing blogs, writing books, publishing on social media, or do it by speaking, having a podcast, going to events, finding what you are good at, and then bringing it either online or offline, and not thinking about it as a transaction. Oh, I want to have a networking event and I'm going to get 6 prospects at the event. It's no, I'm going to host a networking event and I'm going to think about how much value I could provide each one of the people that show up. Maybe it's finding a photographer that does headshots for free because people always need their LinkedIn profiles updated. Maybe it's finding a certain sponsor that's dedicated to your niche. But if you just hyper focus on giving and giving that value first, whether it be with your writing or with a podcast or by doing events in person, I think you can develop that community.
Absolutely. So we're picking a medium, and we're either writing or we're speaking or we're hosting events. We're doing something to give to our community. At what point is there a critical mass where we start to say, okay, now we've gotten a group of people. Now let's start to turn this into a business. How does that transition come about?
I don't think it's as carefully as people may or may not think. I think that once I think you'll feel it once you are giving value and you have a lot of followers and people reaching out to you. I think it's a feeling that you'll have. I think that I would err on the side of launching than not launching, because I think some people could hide behind their community. Tim Ferriss talks about 1,000 fans. I don't know if there's a certain number, but I think that once you know that you've provided value and you're known for that value, you'll feel it. And then you could kind of make that shift into showing people what's next.
That's great. So we're focused on providing value, and we're not like calculating, okay, exactly this time I'm gonna launch this and do this, but we're really trying to feel and test out the waters and make sure that we're ready and the community is ready to take that next step and really move forward. Is that kind of an accurate summation? You
got it. I should have hired you to give my answers. Great.
Well, you're the expert, so can't summarize something from nothing. But yeah, so we talked a lot about your past, and we talked a lot about how you got here, and we talked a little bit about what you're doing now. Now, I do have a question for you. Well, this whole thing had a lot of questions, but another one. Now that you've moved into the role of COO, how does that work with your entrepreneurial spirit? Do you have a yearning to go start other things and be doing things outside of it, or how do you feel about that? How has that been a part of your life?
Well, first of all, being a leader of a fast growing company, I mean, we grew 175% last year to this year, I would definitely say is entrepreneurial. The second thing is that sometimes I just can't help myself, and I'll start companies on the weekends and come up with ideas and just to, keep my juices flowing. But I think for right now, 360 Payments is definitely an entrepreneurial company. It's definitely an entrepreneurial pursuit. You don't have to be a founder to be entrepreneurial. You don't even necessarily have to be an entrepreneur to make an impact. But I think for right now, 360 is definitely feeding those juices.
That's great. So, we talked about your past, we talked about your present, what you're doing now. Can we talk about the future? And I want to know specifically, what does the future hold for Derek? Where do you see yourself going in 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, right now I only have one 3.5-year-old son, so I'd like to have a couple more kids. But entrepreneurially, that's a really tough question. I think I will absolutely be at 360 Payments. I don't intend on leaving anytime soon. But what I do know is that I will always be focused on providing access to things that people don't always have access to. And again, that could be products, that could be services. I love changing industries. So if I'm not able to do that at 360 Payments, then I'll be doing that somewhere else. And, that's my personal mission. And I'm going to continue to execute that both personally and professionally as an entrepreneur.
That's incredible. Well, Derek, I want to thank you so much for coming on the interview and spending the amount of time that you have. I can only imagine how busy you must be. I just have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
So, we've been analyzing life. We've been going through here. We've been talking about a lot of different things, a lot of different facets. That being said, is there anything about yourself that you think is an important part of who you are that I did not ask you about today? In other words, what did I miss?
I think the biggest thing about being an entrepreneur is you can listen to great podcasts like yours and others and read the books and do the internet searching. But ultimately, it comes down to getting out of the building and just starting and understanding that failure is okay. It's part of the process, but you have to just continue to move forward. The most successful startups are the ones that survived. And I just think it requires a lot of effort. But if you're passionate about the problem you're solving, you won't have an issue working at 11, 12, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning on a problem that you're passionate about. And you just got to get out there and do it.
That's fantastic. So, Derek, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. To everybody that's listening, I want to thank you guys so much. You guys are the reason we do what we do. And again, I highly encourage everybody that's listening to go back and listen to this a couple times and really, really try to dig in and drill down into what Derek's been saying, because there's been a ton of value here. It's been a ton of value in a very short period of time, and it's very, very, it would be very advantageous to you to really take those lessons and pick out the parts that are most relevant to you and implement into your business. If you get fired up but you don't implement, you can't see the results. So go back, get the nuggets. There's tons of them. Implement, see results. That's what it's all about. So, Derek, for somebody who they're really fired up right now, they want to take it to the next level, they want to get more involved with you, what would be the next step?
Well, first of all, as I said, I love helping entrepreneurs. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. 360 Payments is at 360payments.com. And I did co-found a marketing firm that helps people build their cult. It's called buildyourcult.com. And you can reach out to me there as well. And I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So, Derek, again, I want to thank you so much. Everybody who's listening, thank you very much. This has been another Project Egg interview. And remember, this is the #1 podcast for educating and inspiring entrepreneurs to turn their dreams into reality. Hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll see you on the very next episode. Take care.